Yeah, you mentioned that not only was Reagan, did Reagan particularly target Clark Kerr, but J. Edgar Hoover also felt that Clark Kerr was a menace as the president of the University of California. Could you talk about Kerr himself, his history, and his role in terms of the FBI targeting him and Reagan? Because a lot of people also forget that Reagan was the first person to institute tuition at the University of California. Which before him had been free to all people who were able to get into the California university system.
Yes. Clark Kerr is one of the towering figures in American higher education. He was born in 1911, coincidentally the same year that Ronald Reagan was born. Kerr came from a rural part of Pennsylvania. His father was a farmer and a teacher. And Kerr worked on the farm as a boy and attended a one-room schoolhouse. Kerr has written in his memoirs that he had a teacher at this one-room schoolhouse named Miss Elba who took an interest in him and had a profound impact on him. She helped him become a good student, and as a result of that, he went on to attend Swarthmore College. So Kerr has always felt, from his very early days, very strongly about the power of education to transform people's lives. At Swarthmore, Kerr becomes a Quaker. He believes in nonviolence, and he works for social justice through the American Friends Service Committee, and then moves to California, does graduate work at the University of California, Berkeley, and later becomes the first chancellor at Berkeley in the 1950s. In 1958, he's appointed president of the University of California system. Kerr helps expand the University of California into one of the greatest public universities in history and opens the door to higher education for thousands of people. One of the things that Kerr accomplishes is called the Master Plan for Higher Education. This was a system of junior colleges, four-year colleges, and public universities, graduate schools like UC Berkeley, that was set up around California and was then emulated around the country and internationally. And this really transformed the educational system and opened it up to many, many people. At the same time Kerr was doing this, he also opened the University of California campus to free speech in many ways. He lifted the ban against communist and socialist speakers, and his explanation at the time was, the university is not engaged in making ideas safe for students, it's engaged in making students safe for ideas. He believed that if students were well educated, they could hear ideas from any point of view and then make the right decisions. However, J. Edgar Hoover didn't appreciate that point of view. He viewed Kerr as potentially subversive, and certainly as somebody who was not in sympathy with Hoover's own political views. He blamed Kerr for opening the campus to activism and was very angry at Kerr later during the free speech movement for not cracking down more severely on student protesters. So in my Freedom of Information Act lawsuit, I requested any and all records concerning Clark Kerr, and the FBI released over 1,000 pages on him. And what these documents show is that the FBI did normal background investigations of Kerr because he was in a high position at the university and was overseeing the nuclear radiation labs, but that the FBI also used these background investigations as a pretext to try and sabotage his career. And one way the FBI did this under J. Edgar Hoover was by gathering allegations against Kerr and then sending them to the White House, to President Lyndon Johnson, even though the FBI had investigated the allegations and knew that they were untrue. And the FBI also leaked information to conservative members of the Board of Regents in an effort to convince the regents to fire Kerr. But Kerr had a very staunch ally in Governor Pat Brown. And as long as Pat Brown was the governor of California, Kerr would remain as president of the University of California. So when Ronald Reagan was elected in in November of '66. FBI officials saw this as a breath of fresh air. They finally had an ally in the governor's office, and they complied with Governor Reagan's request to meet with him soon after he was elected. They gave him an extensive briefing about Berkeley, about Clark Kerr, about his opponents on the Board of Regents. And then very shortly thereafter, Kerr was fired at the University of California.
I want to turn to an interview from the 60s with FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover speaking about how the American Communist Party was committed to the overthrow of the government by force and violence.
I think that communism is as serious a menace to the United States as it ever was, if not more so. The tendency to judge the strength of the Communist Party by its membership in numbers is fallacious, and I think can lead us into very serious trouble, because today you have in charge of the Communist Party a hardcore, fanatical group of members who are dedicated to the overthrow of our government by force and violence. The Communist Party itself is a part of an international criminal conspiracy for the destruction of the American way of life.
So that was J. Edgar Hoover. If you could, Seth Rosenfeld, fit this into how the government dealt with Clark Kerr, but also, though, he was also unpopular among the students, ultimately.
Yes, he was. In the early years of the Cold War, particularly right after World War II, there was great concern about communism. There were links between the Communist Party in the United States and the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union did attempt to use some Communist Party officials in the United States to gather nuclear secrets and other information from the University of California. But by 1957, the U.S. Supreme Court had ruled that being a member of the Communist Party was not in and itself illegal. There had to be further evidence that a member of the Communist Party was engaged in espionage or breaking a law. Despite this court ruling, the FBI continued to intensively investigate communists, socialists, and according to congressional findings in the 70s, virtually anybody who challenged the status quo, and amassed more than 500,000 files on American citizens. So at Berkeley, Hoover was extremely concerned about dissent, and he focused on Clark Kerr and tried to get him fired. At the same time, the student activists viewed Clark Kerr as their adversary. Clark Kerr had, in fact, opened the campus in many ways to free speech. He believed in public debate, but he had not responded quickly enough to the students' challenge in 1964 against a campus rule that still prohibited free speech on campus. Kerr came from the point of view that keeping politics off campus would protect the university from outside political influences and therefore protect academic freedom. But many of the students, particularly Mario Savio and other people who had been involved in the civil rights movement, saw this rule as an outrageous limitation on their free speech rights. Savio had spent that summer in the South registering blacks to vote. He had faced down the Ku Klux Klan. He'd been assaulted by the Ku Klux Klan. And he returned to campus in that fall of '64 only to find that this rule prohibited him from even handing out a leaflet on campus. So when Clark Kerr failed to lift this rule, the students came to view him as their enemy. Clark Kerr was really the man in the middle. On the one hand, he had Ronald Reagan challenging him, accusing him of being weak on student protesters. On the other hand, he had Mario Savio and other student activists who viewed him as their enemy. And then behind the scenes, unbeknownst to anybody at the time, was J. Edgar Hoover's FBI secretly working to get Clark Kerr fired, and meanwhile secretly giving Ronald Reagan personal and political help.
Seth Rosenfeld, we just have 30 seconds, but what were you most shocked by? I mean, that's a big question to ask for someone who's done this research and gotten so many hundreds of thousands of pages from the FBI and done this research for 30 years. But as you published this book this week, Subversives, the FBI's War on Student Radicals and Reagan's Rise to Power, what most shocked you?
I think what I found most shocking is the extraordinary breadth and depth of the FBI's activities concerning the University of California and its focus on First Amendment activities under J. Edgar Hoover. The documents show that the FBI took techniques developed for use against adversaries during wartime and turned them against people involved in legitimate public dissent at UC Berkeley. And ultimately, my book, Subversives, is a cautionary tale about the dangers that secrecy and power pose to democracy.
Well, we want to thank you very much for being with us. The book Subversives has come out this week. It is by Seth Rosenfeld. He was an award-winning reporter for the San Francisco Examiner and San Francisco Chronicle for almost 25 years. Thanks so much. This is Democracy